Hello, good morning. This is more for me than for you. I figured I'd try something here. It's about 3 o'clock in the morning and I can't get to sleep. So I'm because I keep having these thoughts, and all of a sudden I'm up, uh, ready to do something, and I say, no, 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 you need to sleep. And I lay back down again. And a few minutes later, I'm up again with another thought. So I figured I would come out here to sort of download all that thought that gets me activated, and either see if I can get back to sleep or start my day and start doing some of this stuff. Uh, this is an interesting time. I'm encountering the forensic psychologists one on one personally by name. I haven't met any of them. I'm not exchanging emails with them at this point, but I'm addressing the issues. And uh, the prompting event is I'm starting to write the articles. Now, I have avoided writing articles in the past because I'm not ready for the encounter. The forensic psychologists are in positions of power and authority, and I'm a clinical psychologist, lone clinical psychologist without allies, without anything, no university appointments or anything. And I'm threatening their careers and threatening their financial income. They want to be forensic psychologists in the family courts. However, we need to get rid of what they do, which is these forensic custody evaluations. So when they leave, so do the custody evaluators, and they don't want to leave. And so they will protect their turf. They will protect their exploitation of parents. And the fundamental issue, and this is where we're coming down to now, is that they were allowed to conduct an experiment on human subjects without any oversight, without any risk benefit analysis, without anything, and in violation of all three principles of the Belmont Report. They were just allowed to experiment on human subjects. And the reason is they left the healthcare system and went into the legal system with this quasi judicial role. That's the experiment, this quasi judicial role for doctors in the legal system. They are no longer diagnosing and treating pathology as part of the healthcare system. So they left healthcare to do this experimental role in the legal system without risk benefit analysis, without any oversight whatsoever. And the experiment was a complete failure. It was ill conceived from the start, and it was extremely poorly executed from an ill conceived idea. And the experiment needs to end. When the experiment finally got external review from the New York Blue Ribbon Commission on Forensic Custody Evaluations, it was determined that this experiment is dangerous and harmful to children. That would never pass any sort of risk management for experimenting on human subjects. Something that is dangerous, harmful to children, produces defective reports with potentially disastrous consequences for parents and children. And this is not me saying it, it is because it's true. It's the New York Blue Ribbon Commission on Forensic Custody Evaluations. And so even if they object and say, oh no, the commission was wrong, they're not. But even if they object and want to argue with that, we should put an end to something that is questionably dangerous and harmful to children, and it is a complete experiment. Now here's the other thing is I represent the targeted parent. The targeted parent and their attorney bring me into a matter. The first thing I want to know is what's the diagnosis, because I'm looking for a delusional thought disorder. Factitious disorder imposed on another leads to the child's psychological abuse and a protective separation. That's the interests of my client and my client's attorney. However, the forensic psychologists are withholding diagnostic information from my client and my client's attorney, which does not allow, which then they cannot press the case to the court for a child protection response because they are absent the diagnostic information that's being withheld from them. And the court is absent the diagnostic information that this is a delusional disorder, that this is a false, factitious pathology, that this is child psychological abuse. They are withholding that information from the court because they want to do this experiment on a new quasi-judicial role that doesn't diagnose or treat anything but decides who deserves to have a parent. They want to judge parents about who deserves to have a child based on arbitrary criteria of their own creation. And it's just an abomination. It needs to end. The New York Blue Ribbon Commission says they need to be entirely eliminated from the family courts. But when that happens, all the forensic custody evaluators, Saini, Stahl, Simon, Deutsch, every one of them has to leave. Because that's what they do, is this experiment. If we go turn to clinical psychology, none of them are competent in the pathology. I'm going through their vitas right now. That's one of the things working on yesterday. I'll be cleaning these up. I have Droid's Vita, Dr. Droid worked up. I have Saini pretty much worked up. I have Saul and Simon pretty much worked up. Sullivan I've got worked up on their vitas. And these are the top people, former presidents of the AFCC. They're sitting on the editorial board of the journal, and they're not competent in a variety of things. And, when you look at their vita, there's just no there there. They got a doctorate degree and then entered the family courts doing this experiment on forensic custody. And that's the only thing they've ever done. For 20, 30 years, 40 years, is this experiment on human subjects where they just get to make stuff up. In the legal system, they're not part of the healthcare system. They're no longer doctors diagnosing and treating pathology, to the absolute destruction of these families and children and their lives. Do they care? No. Do they care that they're in violation of 2.01, 2.04, 3.04, 9.01, 2.03 of the APA ethics? No, they don't care. Licensing boards don't care. The licensing boards just let them do it because they're not clinical people. They're not doing healthcare. They left healthcare and they're authorized by the legal system, these psychologists, to conduct this experiment on human subjects without any oversight. It's just really bad. Now, the attorneys in the AFCC should deal with this, because half of the attorneys, the ones representing the targeted parents, are being denied the diagnostic information they need for their client and to press their case for a child protection. And they can't get that information from the forensic psychologists because they're withholding that. So the forensic psychologists are essentially collaborating and colluding with the child abuse by covering it up, by not telling the litigant parents about the child abuse, about the delusional thought disorder, about the factitious disorder, and by not telling the court about it. They are covering it up and hiding it. And so there's no proper intervention. The forensic psychologists, I'll say this about all of them, Saini, Droids, Fiddler, just pick one, are intentionally disabling the mental health system response to the pathology in the family courts for their own financial and career status gain. The conflict of interest right now in the forensic psychology is huge. And that's what my article to the Family Court Review, the journal of the AFCC, is designed to expose. So I wrote this article that describes the pathology. I kept it really clean. Okay, I didn't talk about parental alienation. I just talked about clinical psychology diagnosis of the pathology. Now, I'm a clinical psychologist. I described it, and I submitted it to the journal Family Court Review for two reasons. One is if they publish it, then all of a sudden we get back to clinical psychology and this information gets out there and we get diagnoses and treatment. If they don't publish it, then I have documentation that they are withholding this information from the attorneys, from the mental health people in the courts, from the parent litigants in the courts, that they are intentionally withholding relevant information from one of the litigants, clinical information. And so one way or the other, I have them. And so they rejected it and they gave me some comments. So now I have their comments and the rejection. And I'm in the process, I'm going to respond to that. Now, typically, you get rejected by a journal, you don't respond to the editorial board. I'm going to respond to the editorial board because I have 1.05 that says I should take appropriate action or further action appropriate to the situation. Well, what's further action appropriate to the situation when the licensing boards have been disabled and you have this experiment by these random group of forensic psychologists on children and parents in the family courts? They created this role not because it solves the problem, not because it meets the needs of the litigants or the court. They created this role for themselves because they want to do this role of judging which parent deserves to have a child. That's their counter transfer and stuff, for $20,000 to $40,000 per assessment on a leisurely 6 to 9 month, assessment for possible child abuse. It's meeting their desires, their needs, not that, but there's no oversight review for any of it. That's just insanely problematic. And they can't change and correct the situation in any way without admitting that it's a complete failure and everything was a nightmare about what they did. So now they're kind of stuck. They have to intentionally prevent parents and children from getting a clinical diagnosis of the child's psychological abuse, because otherwise they admit they misdiagnosed the child's psychological abuse this whole time. So they are in a massive, massive conflict of interest and cover up of their failure. And it's with the AFCC journal. So I submit the article and they're covering it up because of the conflict of interest and their own. So that's what gets me up in the middle of the night. It's like, start thinking about this and get up there. Now, specifically, though, as I'm kind of working out what to do about this, when I don't have any oversight committees, I don't have anything, but I do have the AFCC Board of Directors, and the AFCC has attorneys. It's not just the forensic psychologists, it's attorneys. And the attorneys need to understand the distorted and extremely low level of information that they're getting from the forensic psychologists. They put on this advanced course that's not even rudimentary, that's not even basic, and they're calling it advanced because they think that's what they're getting from these forensic psychologists. Is I'm an expert. No, you're not. You're not an expert at anything. You're just making stuff up, and and so the attorneys need to understand that. And the attorneys need to get accurate diagnostic information for their clients and the courts. Here's the one issue. When I come on to a matter, I have two clients. My client in a family is always the child, and my responsibility to the child is to ensure that the child has an accurate diagnosis that results in an effective treatment plan for whatever the problem is. ADHD, autism, trauma, attachment pathology, I don't care. My obligation to the client child is that the child gets an accurate diagnosis that leads to an effective treatment plan. Now, when the court is involved, I get a second client. That's the court, because the court's going to be making these tremendously impactful decisions about my child client. So my obligations to both the child and the court are the same. My obligations to the court is to ensure that the court receives an accurate diagnosis for its decision making. So my goal when I'm brought on by a client parent and the client attorney is to ensure that the child gets an accurate diagnosis and effective treatment plan to fix the problem. However, we can't get that because the forensic psychologists are withholding DSM-5 diagnostic information that the client needs from the litigant parent so that they cannot press their case for a child protection response from the court, and so that the court does not understand that this is child psychological abuse needing a protective response, that this is a delusional disorder, that it's a factitious disorder being created by a pathological parent. The court is being denied that information that one client wants because they're not conducting these assessments. The clinical diagnostic assessments are not diagnosing pathology. Now, it's a reasonable step for a doctor to diagnose at a professional level, DSM-5, ICD-11. It's a reasonable step for a doctor to diagnose the pathology at a professional level in order to avoid the foreseeable harm of misdiagnosis if you don't diagnose the pathology. So if you don't provide a professional level diagnosis, if you don't even assess for a possible delusional disorder, if you don't even assess for a possible factitious disorder, or for possible spousal abuse of the targeted parent by the allied parent using the child as a weapon, or for possible psychological child abuse by the allied parent who's creating delusional thought disorders and factitious disorders in the child for secondary gain. If you don't even assess for that, that's a violation of standard 3.04, avoiding harm. You're not taking a reasonable step to avoid misdiagnosis of very, very serious pathologies. And they don't care. The psychologists don't care. The AFCC doesn't care. The licensing boards don't care. Of violations to avoiding harm, about experiments on human subjects, about violations to 2.01, 2.04, and 9.01 of the APA Ethics Code. I mean, truth is truth. So over the course of time, this will eventually happen, and we will eventually get accurate diagnoses for the child of child psychological abuse and delusional thought disorder so we can fix the problem and protect children and stop the child abuse. But we're going to have to overcome the cover-up and resistance of the forensic psychologists who are colluding with the child abuse by covering it up and preventing the court from taking appropriate action. So what do I do about that? That's what I'm sitting up at 3 o'clock. What do I do about that? So it's going to be some variation of notifying the AFCC Journal Family Court Review regarding the disabling of its editorial board, disabling of its decision making by the conflict of interest in the forensic psychologists on the board. So the legal professionals should take over the board of the editorial board for a while of the AFCC because of the conflict of interest within the forensic psychologists of covering up their incompetence, covering up their failed experiment. And we need to begin, and they need to be eliminated from the family courts. All the forensic psychologists on the editorial board need to leave the family courts because what they do is dangerous, harmful to children, and should be eliminated. So that's what they do. Bye. But that's not going to hit the journals. The journal is not going to talk about that or discuss the conflict of interest or the cover-up or the collusion with child abuse or the experiment on human subjects. They're going to withhold that information from the other attorneys, from other mental health professionals, from the general public, because of the financial gain and career status gain to people like Saini, Deutsch, Sullivan, pick one. Okay. And that's a problem, big problem. So I'm going to be notifying them. So I'm kind of running around how extensive to get, and they're not going to read it, and it's just going to, it's not going to have effect. It's going to go in, but the conflict of interest is substantial, and so the judgment of the AFCC board of directors, the AFCC editorial board is significantly compromised. Now, what I realize is they think they're rejecting my article. Oh, no, no, no. I'm getting documentation on you. It's not an accident that I've been in the family courts for 15 years and haven't written any journal articles, because I know the PAS people in their journal don't want it. I submitted to them, got documentation. You don't want to know the answer. So that's the one cited by Walters and Friedlander, by the way, is the one submitted there. Now I've written one for the AFCC to get documentation. They don't want to hear what the pathology is. They want to keep making up new stuff because they want to be experts. Then they don't want to leave the family courts because they're not competent in actual forms of pathology and misdiagnosed the pathology and conducted experiments on human subjects and just all these bad things. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start submitting just article after article after article. And now that I have the large one out, I can start targeting. So the next one is going to be on best practices in the family courts. That's the one I submitted up to the PASG up in Toronto to do a presentation on. I haven't heard back from them. They may just ignore me. But I'm going to take the article that I wrote in submission for that I also gave them to say, here's the article if you want to look at what actually best practices would look like. And I'm going to submit it to the AFCC Family Court Review on best practices in the family courts. They'll look at that and say, nope, we're not publishing this one either. Then I'm going to submit one on risk assessment in the family courts, just on risk assessment. We have 3 obligations: conduct a proper risk assessment, ensure what gets conducted, to take an affirmative protective action, and we'll talk about duty of protect and risk management and risk assessments. They'll have to reject that one because they can't acknowledge that they have duty to protect obligations, because then they have to start diagnosing the delusional thought disorder and factitious disorder. So they're going to have to continually cover up and reject the articles from Dr. Childress when there's not publishing anything from Dr. Childress, because the moment they do, that's an alternative to what they do, a clinical diagnostic assessment rather than a forensic custody evaluation, and then they'll go away. Because if I can return a clinical diagnostic assessment within 4 to 6 weeks for around $5,000, rather than 6 to 9 months for a forensic custody evaluation, $20,000 to $40,000, and we can get a second opinion through telehealth on a clinical assessment, we can't get that on a custody evaluation. That's just the opinion of one person. The courts and parents are going to choose the clinical diagnostic assessment. In fact, they are. I'm getting court orders to participate in those as second opinion stuff. And so we are shifting over to diagnostic assessments because that's the information the court needs. That's the information we need for treatment. What's the diagnosis? Are we treating cancer or diabetes? So at some point, we need a diagnosis for treatment. Is it a delusional thought disorder? Is it a factitious disorder? Is it child psychological abuse? We need answers. And we can get that in 4 to 6 weeks, and we don't need a custody evaluation that doesn't diagnose a pathology, and we will still need a diagnosis even after that 6 to 9 month, $20,000 custody evaluation. So nobody will be selecting their custody. Everybody will want standard healthcare clinical diagnostic assessment, and so they'll go away. They have no role anymore. And they don't want that. So it's their conflict of interest over their personal, financial, and career status gain is huge, 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 huge. And they are, be clear, they are intentionally disabling the mental health system response to the pathology in the family courts for their own financial and career status gain. They are purposely, intentionally covering up the child's psychological abuse in the family courts by a narcissistic, borderline, dark personality parent producing delusional thought disorders and factitious disorders imposed on the child. They are intentionally covering that up to the benefit of the pathological parent and to the harm of the child who's being psychologically abused for their own personal, financial, and career status gain. What's the further action appropriate to that situation? So that's what I'm doing. So now I'm not getting back to sleep after this. I'm make my coffee and start my day here. But the question becomes clear in my mind. Start with what? Where do I begin with this? So I have to do the course evaluations for the AFCC conference that was Droid and Fiddler came out and talked. So I'll do those course evaluations. Then I think I'm just going to finish up my Vita analysis for Saini, finish it up for Sullivan, get nice closure on that. And then Stahl and Simon on that, Fiddler on that. Then, gosh, I think probably another notice into the AFCC Board of Directors about the experiment in human subjects, and about the editorial board. I think I will notice. That's what I'll do. I will provide a response to the editorial chief, the head of the editorial board of the AFCC Journal Family Court Review. I'll respond to that and give them notice that the editorial board is corrupted by a conflict of interest, and the substantial conflict of interest, and that issues about competence with the reviewers on the board, that they're not even competent in the pathology and they're covering up their ethical violations and things. So I'll notice them. But then, because it's the journal of the AFCC, I should provide notice to the AFCC Board of Directors regarding the compromised nature of their journal. That's further action appropriate to the situation when the experiment is being conducted without any risk-benefit analysis and oversight, and the AFCC is participating in covering up the child abuse, covering up the delusional thought disorder, covering up the factitious disorder from the court's understanding, and withholding diagnostic information from the litigant parent to their detriment and to the advantage of the other litigant parent. So they're putting their little finger on the scale of justice in favor of the pathological parent and in favor of the child abuse, versus a balanced reporting was what's the diagnosis here, and let the court make decisions about what the diagnosis is, apply diagnostic criteria to the symptom evidence. But they don't do that, because the moment they do that, their role is gone. Financial and career status gain. So I should probably notice the AFCC Board of Directors. Now, I sit on a board of directors for a foster care agency that works with the county grants on for kids in foster care, kids in the juvenile justice system, and help support them with wraparound services at school and things. So I've been sitting on the board of directors for that for 10, 15 years now. And so I understand the oversight function of a board of directors. And if there's unethical practices occurring within the organization, And if there's cover up of child abuse and cover up and this experiment that's being conducted under your auspices and with your sort of imprimatur of credibility, you should know about that as a board of directors. The attorney board of directors, now the forensic psychologists don't want to know this, and they're the ones that are covering up. And so the attorneys who are on the board should recognize the quality of information and what's happening with the forensic psychologists so that they can organize to get diagnostic assessments for their targeted parent litigant client, because that's what they want. We need to get the diagnoses of the pathology for this one litigant parent so they can make their case to the court. And so your psychologist people in the AFCC need to do that and provide services to the court of returning a diagnosis so the court has accurate diagnostic information on which to base its decisions, and returning the diagnosis to the parent so that the parent can make their case to the court, and getting an accurate diagnosis so we can get effective treatment. All of these reasons for that. And we're coming to crunch time. This second layer, I'm thinking layers going in. The next phase of this, though, is I'm just going to start saying debate, 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 debate. Let's get online moderated debates. If you disagree with Dr. Childress, fine. Let's debate it. Online 2-hour moderated debate, public debate. Is our forensic psychology an experiment on human subjects? Yes, Dr. Childress. No, any forensic psychology. Are the forensic psychologists in violation of multiple ethical standards? Yes, Dr. Childress. No, any forensic psychologist. Do we need to eliminate forensic custody evaluations from the family courts? Yes, Dr. Childress. No, pick a forensic psychologist. Are forensic custody evaluations dangerous and harmful to children? Yes, Dr. Childress. No, pick a forensic psychologist. So I'll just come down with a whole list of debate topics and pick one. And Dr. Childress versus any forensic psychologist you pick. I'm going to continue to expose the cover-up and conflict of interest until somebody does something about it. Okay, somebody gets over here and starts to protect a vulnerable population who has impaired autonomy in decision making regarding their children and their lives, and who is in high need of mental health services and therefore very vulnerable to exploitation by the forensic psychologists who are just exploiting them with these 20 to 40,000 behemoth forensic custody evaluations that solve nothing and provide no diagnosis and just meets the needs of the forensic psychologist. The parents and children bear all the risks of the experiment, and the forensic psychologists get all the benefits. That's who is reviewing this. When was this experiment reviewed and approved? Never. By who? Nobody. How often was the progress of their development of this experiment reviewed for progress, and what's the outcome measure? Never. It was never reviewed. There is no outcome measure. They're just allowed to experiment on a vulnerable population. Now, Saini's from Canada. Canada's got a good little piece about vulnerable populations. But, Saini's not licensed. That's the other thing. Holy cow. The president of the AFCC has a doctorate degree in social work, not clinical psychology. So he's not competent in diagnosis and treatment of pathology. He has never been trained in the diagnostic assessment or treatment of pathology. And he's been conducting these forensic custody evaluations for 40 years, and he's not licensed. So you can have a doctorate degree who's licensed or not licensed. You don't even need to be in psychology. You can have a doctorate degree in political science. Well, social work, close enough. Social work, okay. Maybe political science, I don't know. They should give it a try. Political science doctors should come over to the family court to see if they can conduct a forensic custody evaluation. You can do it with a master's degree, so you don't even need a doctorate. There's no education. You're not trained in attachment, family systems, or any. You're not trained in anything, so it's just your personal opinion. There's no inter-rater reliability to them, so it is just your personal opinion. And even like licensed professional counselors, that's like the lowest level. Even they can conduct these because the president of the Washington chapter is a licensed professional counselor, not even a master's degree license. And so licensed professional counselors can conduct them, master's level can conduct them, the doctoral level can conduct them, and you don't even need to be licensed really to conduct them because they're quasi judicial role, I guess, in the legal system. So, how does Michael Saini conduct these without a license? If I want to complain about his practice beyond the boundaries of his competence and his ethical violations, avoiding harm, and with the vulnerable population, violations of all these standards, who do I complain to? He's not licensed. There's no oversight from Dr. Saini. Oh my goodness. And he's the president of the AFCC and sits on the editorial board of the Family Court Review. Can we get your car mechanic to come in and conduct the evaluation? He's not licensed, and so why not? I mean, what's the criteria for conducting one? You have to be licensed or no license or masters, or what's the training requirement for that? I've got a lot of writing to do. Okay, I'm going to have a lot to put together with all this. The advantage is once I do it, it's all done. So like I do, I have the Dr. Droid's Vita analysis all packaged up. So now I've just got that. I don't have to redo it every time. And when I get Sullivan and Saini and one after the other as I do this, then I don't need to redo it. I have the ethics notice to the APA Ethics Committee. I have board of directors notice about the course that they gave. And now I'm going to be noticing about the, family court review. So, if nothing else, I get familiar with the name Dr. Childress as being a bit of an irritant. I wish he would stop talking about ethical practices and our incompetence. I wish he'd stop talking about the Belmont report and experiment. Would you please go away, Dr. Childress? You're kind of not annoying us in our slumber. So, with that, I'm going to go make a cup of coffee and start my day. Thanks for listening. Geez Louise, it's a nightmare out there. And, the final thing, boy, as I think about some of this stuff, you are really lucky you have me at the right place at the right time, because they'd be doing this to you for the next 20, 30, 40 years if they could. Nobody cares. You're abandoned. Nobody cares about the families in the family courts. And that's a major issue. You've been abandoned by clinical psychology, by the APA, by everybody in psychology, and you've just been given over to this ragtag group of people to do whatever they want to you. Very bad situation. The patient should never have to explain the pathology to the doctor. That should just never happen. And yet the patients in the family courts are explaining the pathology to the forensic psychologist. And that's going to be a lead line in noticing the board of directors and the editorial review board, that if I have to explain the pathology to them, they're not competent by demonstrated need to have the pathology explained to them. So with that, bye-bye, everybody. Talk to you later.